Hello everyone, welcome to another video on the Medi Data Perspective channel. In our today's tutorial, we'll be learning how to add and remove columns from our data frame. We'll be looking at how we can combine multiple columns of data into one. So as usual, I'll be using my snippet file containing our sample data set to understand the concept before going to our survey data to carry out more examples. With that being said, without wasting time, let's dive right into it. So first, we'll be looking at how we can add columns to an already existing data frame. So we have our data frame, which we created from this data dictionary. So for example, let's say we want to add our first name column and our last name column into a single column and call it the full name column. Okay, so to do this, I can simply concatenate these two columns together by using our plus sign. Remember, when you are adding two strings together, you can make use of the plus sign as it will concatenate those strings together. So we can say df. Let's call the name of our columns first, and we'll be calling the plus because we want to add these two columns together, and let's say last. And if I go ahead and run this code, you see we'll be getting these two columns concatenated together. You have Alice Wonderland, Bob Marley, Charlie Livid, etc. So we would want to put space between these two words. Okay, so we'll be adding another plus sign, but this time around it's going to be containing space. Okay, and let's go ahead and run this and see the difference. So now you can see we have space between Alice and Wonderland, and this cannot be our new column, which will be naming our full name. So remember, to add a new column to your data frame, you can easily say we want to call this the name you are giving to your new column, which is full name, and the code or the values that are going to be making up that new column, and this is what we'll be using, right? So let's go ahead and run this, and if I go ahead and print out this data frame once more, we'll be seeing a new column added to our data frame called full name. So you can see our full name contains Alice and Wonderland, which is gotten from our first name column and our last name column, and that's how we can add a column to an already existing data frame. So let's take another example. Now we'll be using the apply method to create another column in our data frame. So for this full name column, we want to use the apply method to convert our full name values to uppercasing. I'll be adding this new column to our data frame as our uppercasing column. Okay, so to do this, we just have to call our full name column full name. I'll be calling the dot apply method dot apply. And you know, for the dot apply method, what we want to apply, we'll be applying our lambda function. So this lambda function is going to be saying we want to apply the upper method on all values in the full name column. I'm calling the upper method on the full name column. So what we are saying, for x, which is each value in this full name column, we want to apply this dot upper method on it. So if I go ahead and run this, you could see that we have Alice Wonderland, Bob Marley, all in uppercasing, right? So I can go ahead and use this as another column in this data frame. So let me go ahead and copy this, and what will be the name of our new column we want to create? We can call this upper full name, and we can just go ahead and paste the code we just copied. And if I go down and say we want to print our data frame, want to see what our data frame looks like, you can now see that we have another column which we just created containing uppercasing of our full name values. So the next we'll be looking at is how to remove columns from our data frame. Let's say now that since we already have these full name columns, we no longer need the first name and our last name column. So how do we remove this column and this column from this data frame? So we can go ahead and remove these columns by using the dot drop method. So we can do that by saying df dot, call the drop method, which is dot drop, and this dot drop method is going to take in the name of those columns you want to drop. Okay, so we say columns, and we are going to pass in a list, because in this case we want to drop more than one column, right? We want to drop the first name and the last name, so we're going to be passing it inside a list. So say first and the other column is last, right? So these are the two columns we are dropping from our data frame. Now if I run this, we'll see now that both columns would be dropped from our data frame. So we can see we have age, city, salary. That first and last name column is no longer in our data frame. But if I go ahead and print our data frame once more, you will find out that these changes have not been kept in place. In our previous tutorial, you will see situations where we had to use this dot in place value to keep our changes in place. So to keep your changes in place, you have to add the dot in place and set it to true. So you're trying to say, yes, I made these changes and I'm cool with my changes. Okay, so I want you to keep those changes in place. So if I go ahead and run this, and if we look at our data frame once more, you can see that those changes have been kept in place and our data frame now has been changed. It no longer contains the first and the last name columns. Now I'll be showing you something else. So let's say we want to get both our columns back from our full name columns. Remember, we use those columns which we just dropped to create this full name column, right? So let's say, okay, we want to get those our columns back. We want to create two columns from our full name column. So how do I go ahead to do that? We can easily use the dot split method to do that. So we'll be splitting our full name column into our first and our last name column. So let me show you how you can do that. We will say df, call the name of that column which you want to split, which is our full name, and you will call the dot split method, but the dot split method use the dot str, which is a string, and call the dot split method. So for the dot split method, you are going to identify what do you want to split by. So we're splitting by those space. Remember that when we're creating this column, we added space between the first name, which is Alice, and the last name, which is Wonderland. Remember, right? So we'll be splitting by that space. So let me go ahead and run this code and see what we get. So you can see we have Alice space and Wonderland. So we have a list containing now our first name and our last name. Now to get this list into two separate columns, we'll have to call the expand argument. So let me say expand. I spelled this wrong, so let's say expand and set it to true. Okay, so let me go ahead and run this, and now you can see we've gotten our two columns. We have our column 1, which is containing Alice, and our column 2, which is containing Wonderland. So we can now go ahead and add these columns into our data frame. And remember, in our previous video when we talked about adding column, how do we go ahead and do that? You can call df and a list, because we are adding two columns this time around, right? What we want to give to our column containing the 0 as the name, we want to change that to first name, and the other column is going to be our last name. Okay, so we can now say this should be equals to this line of code. So let's go ahead and copy this, paste this here, and if you go once more and look at your data frame, now you can see we've added those two columns to our data frame, and it contains first name and last name. So you can see this is how you can add columns to your data frame, remove columns from your data frame. So now let's look at how we can add and remove rows from our data frame. So there are different ways we can add rows to our data frame. We can decide to add a single row to our data frame, or we can also decide to add multiple rows of data in a already existing data frame to our data frame. So we'll be looking at the first scenario, which is adding a single row of data to our existing data frame. So how do we go about to do this? We can use the append method to add a single row to your data frame. So let's say, for example, we want to add another row of data where the name is John, age is 32, and the person lives in Luxembourg. Okay, so how do we go about to do that? So I can say df.append. For our append now, we'll be passing in a dictionary containing those values we want to append to our data frame. Remember, for dictionaries, keys and values. So your key is going to be your column name. So we want to say our first name is going to be John. The last name is going to be Peter. I hope we don't have any John and Peter already. Okay, then we can also say the age is going to be 32, and we said, okay, I say 32. I think previously when I was creating this data set or these dictionaries, I made use of strings as the age values, so I'll have to keep up with that. So age is going to be 32, and we said the city is going to be Luxembourg. I hope I spelled this correctly. Okay, so if I go ahead and run this now, let's look at our error. You can only append a dictionary if the ignore index is equals to true. So let's go ahead and add that and say ignore index and let's set this to true. So let's go ahead and run this again. So you can see now that our code has run smoothly, and we now have a new row containing those values which we've appended. We have age as 32, city Luxembourg, and for those columns which we did not have any values, you can see we have the none, which is not a number and signifies missing values in your data frame. So we have first name as John, last name as Peter. So this is how you can add a single row of data to your already existing data frame using the .append method. So now let's look at how we can add multiple rows of data from an already existing data frame into our data frame. So to do that, I'll be creating a second data frame, and I'll just go ahead and copy this and tweak it a bit. Okay, so let's say we want to create another data frame. Let's call this our data2. We'll just be adding in some few values. So we'll be adding this data frame will be containing just 3 rows of data. So I'll be limiting this to 3 values. Okay. Salary component. Okay, let's say these people don't have salary or jobs for now. Okay, so let me just go ahead and remove this. Remove this. So see, we have the first name, last name, age, and city, and let's change this to let me use Cinderella. Okay, I think it's double L and A. I hope I got that correctly. I should use Charles, and let me use a native name in my country and say Tega, and I'll call this Princess King, and okay, so I would also be changing the age values. Let me just do this and let me say, okay, we have 4. I can leave the rest ages, and let's say we have Abuja, we have Lagos. Okay, so I'll go ahead and run this, and we'll be creating another data frame as well, right? So create a new cell and say our df2 should be equals to pd dot data frame. You know, this is how you create a data frame from a dictionary, and you call the name of your dictionary, which is data2 in this situation. So if I go ahead and say I want to see this dictionary which I just created and run this, you could see we have a data frame containing 4 columns and 3 rows of data. So we would want to add this data frame to our already existing data frame. So how do I go ahead and do that? So to do this, we would also be using the .append method, but in this situation we'll be appending our original data set, which is df, and we'll be appending it to our new data set which we just created, which is df2, right? So let me go ahead and run this and see what we get. You've seen we've gotten our updated data frame containing values from our previous data frame and our new data frame. So you can see we have ages, Abuja, London and Lagos. For those columns which I did not have any values, they are returning as none, which is missing values. The names, we have Cinderella, Princess, King Charles and Solomon Tega. Now if you take note, you can see that it still retains its previous index value of 0, 1 and 2. So to correct that, we can say ignore index and set that to true. So let's say ignore underscore index equals to true. So if we run this once more and let's check our indices now, you can see it has now been corrected, right? So we have 8, 9 and 10. Now to keep our changes in place, we have to assign this data frame to a new name, or if we want to, alter our df data frame which we've created earlier, we can also do that and assign it to the previous name of df. Okay, so we can say df is equals to, let me copy this and paste this here. Okay, so let me show you something before I go ahead and run that code. If I go ahead and check my data frame, which is df, which I added our new data frame to, you would see that we're getting the previous values. Okay, so you can see we just got from 0 to 7. Those new values we've added are not in this data frame yet. To keep your changes in place, you would have to assign these new values which you've added, this line of code, to either you can give this a new data frame name and say we want to call this data frame 3, or you can decide to say we want to update this our previous data frame to this new data frame. So if I go ahead and run this and check our df once more, you can now see that those changes have been kept in place. So you can see we have our values from 0 to 10. So the last thing we'll be looking at is how we can remove rows from this our data frame. So now let's say we want to drop these new rows we just added to this data frame, Cinderella, Charles, Tega. We want to drop those rows of data from this our data frame. So how do we go about to do that? We can also use the .drop method, which we use in dropping columns, to also drop those rows from our data frame. Same process, just that we'll be adding in an extra information. So to do that, we can say df dot, you call the drop method, and this time around, previously we had to pass in the names of those columns we want to drop when we're dropping columns, right? This time around we want to drop rows, and how do we do that? We're going to be passing the index values of those rows we want to drop. So we'll say index is equals to, since we are dropping 3 rows, we are going to pass those index inside a list, and since those index values are index 8, index 9 and index 10, right? So let's say 8, 9, 10. Okay, so we can just go ahead and run this and let's see what we'll get. So if we check this data frame once more, you can see we have from 0 to 7. Remember, if you want to keep this your change in place, we would have to add the in place argument and say in place equals to true. Okay, so if we run this now and check our data frame once more, you would see now that we've gotten our previous data frame with those rows removed from our data frame. So this is how you can add columns, remove columns, add rows and remove rows from your data frame. So this brings us to the end of this video. I hope it was short and straight to the point, and I hope you were able to learn 1 or 2 from this video. If it was educative or informative, kindly do it to click on the like button. Also, endeavor to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content such as this. We also have a playlist where we analyze healthcare data. If you are interested in learning how to analyze healthcare data, that will be a short plug for you to look at. Also, remember to turn on your notification bell so that you'll be the first to know once I drop any video relating to data analysis, learning how to code with Python, healthcare data analysis, and even our new upcoming playlist when we'll be discussing on data, healthcare, and everything in between. Bye for now and see you in my next video.